We're coming off another crazy week of fantasy football, guys. And at this point in the season, we're in the weird portion of fantasy football, guys. And we've got some serious issues here with the wide receiver position specifically. We've got lots of injuries to quarterbacks that are going to affect these rankings today for wide receivers. So we're going to have some bold takes today. And today we're going through the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 9 fantasy football, guys. I'm filming this video at 1 a.m. on Monday morning, guys. And at the end of every ranking video, I give you guys my favorite underdog flex option at each position. So at the end of the video, we will give our underdog wide receiver flex option of the week. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So obviously, number one here, still in the tier with AJ Brown, is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill, to me, there's just no worries ever. Like, even though, like, week to week, yeah, sometimes they'll give you a 35, 40-point game. Sometimes they'll give you a 20-point game. And the 20-point game is like the low mark for him. He averages almost 23 fantasy points per game, and he's taking on the Chiefs this week. There's going to be a lot there as far as narrative for Tyreek Hill to play his best. So Tyreek Hill going up against a tough Chiefs defense, that's the narrative game. He wants to beat his former team. It's an 8:30 a.m. Central game, which, by the way, make sure your lineups are set on Saturday night so you avoid this type of issue here. But Tyreek Hill should never lead your lineup. He's number one for sure. Number two is AJ Brown, taking on the Dallas Cowboys in Philly this week. Listen, AJ Brown is belonging in the same tier as Tyreek Hill these days. AJ Brown's just been tremendous in fantasy. 19 fantasy points per game. He's averaging over 10 targets per game and almost 120 reception yards a game. He just broke Calvin Johnson's record for, I think it's 6 games straight now with 125 yards receiving. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, AJ Brown has been unbelievable of the last couple weeks, and there's just no indication that this is stopping anytime soon. Against the Dallas defense, I don't see much of an issue here. He's just simply too important in this offense, and he's been playing so well. He's just an elite player. Number 3 right here, Jamar Chase is fully back. Jamar Chase is fully back, guys. Do not worry one bit about Jamar Chase against the Buffalo Bills. Yeah, I get it. That's a tough defense right there that he's taking on with Buffalo. Look at the guy's numbers, though. He's averaging over 12 targets per game, averaging 17 fantasy points per game. The Bengals are back. They're totally back. Joe Burrow took more snaps under center last week than he had for the entire season. Why does that matter? It matters because that shows that Joe Burrow is gaining some mobility back. He's getting healthier. Joe Burrow is back, which means that Jamar Chase's upside is fully back. Do not worry about Jamar Chase. You continue to play him. I don't care what the matchup is. The Bengals are back, and Jamar Chase is that dude. Stephon Diggs at number 4 in the same matchup right here because I expect points to be freaking flying all over the place in this game. You want every piece of this game you can get, and Stephon Diggs is an extension piece of that. Stephon Diggs, either way, is the main portion of this Buffalo offense, so you never have Stephon Diggs on your bench. And he's playing, I mean, if you look at it from a fantasy points per game perspective, he's been better than Jamar. I prefer Jamar slightly over him because I think the Bengals are playing better football, more efficient offense so far. So I like Stephon Diggs just fine. Obviously, he's in the same tier as Jamar. It doesn't get much better than these two. And this matchup here, there's going to be points flying. Number 5, CeeDee Lamb, baby. He is back in full swing, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles this week, who, mind you, just got really scared off by the Washington Commanders. Put up a lot of points on him again this season. So CeeDee Lamb came back last week, absolutely lit the world on fire against the Los Angeles Rams. Now, obviously, he's playing a tougher defense with the Philadelphia Eagles on tap this week. But when you see what CeeDee Lamb did, he had 12 receptions last week, and it was a career high. He had 2 touchdowns, almost 200 yards in that game. So these numbers here you're seeing right now are skewed because of the slower start he had to the season. Dak Prescott is learning to target CeeDee Lamb again. This offense is starting to finally prioritize CeeDee Lamb again. I've got no concerns with him coming off that type of week. Keenan Allen at number 6, again, coming off a relatively bad week. For Keenan Allen, you know, for his standards, it was a bad week. Well, this week he's taking on the New York Jets in New York, and that's not going to be an easy matchup. I'm not saying this is an easy matchup by any stretch. I mean, Sauce Gardner and the Giants, just had four passing yards all game. I think it was 8, actually 8. Point is, they had less than 10 passing yards. That is like unbelievable. And like the Giants are not some passing, like it's not some like freak show of passing over there. Like nobody's saying that, but the fact that the Jets defense just held them to under 10 passing yards is absolutely outrageous in today's NFL. That's not going to happen here for Keenan Allen and the Chargers here. Keenan Allen's importance has not gone anywhere. He's had a down couple games because he hasn't found the end zone and he hasn't crossed 100 yards receiving. And the reason for it is because every team knows that they just have to focus in on Keenan Allen. It doesn't change the fact that he's a top tier wide receiver in fantasy because the targets are there. The offensive upside is there with Justin Herbert at quarterback. Keenan Allen just needs to hit the right week. You do not have Keenan Allen on your bench. Davante Adams, I know, coming off just a historically bad week. Like, I get it. I'm going to get pushback for this ranking. I'm sure of it. Davante Adams, to me, this was a bad game against the Lions. There's no way around it. The Lions pass rush was all over Jimmy Garoppolo on Monday night. It was just bad. So with this week taking on the Giants, to me it's such a clear matchup upgrade that it's like, yes, we can look at last week in a vacuum, right? His week 8 performance in a vacuum was bad. Well, here's the reality. If you watch that game on Monday night, Davante Adams was open on 2 separate deep throws that were just horribly overthrown by Jimmy Garoppolo. It's not Davante Adams' fault that his quarterback is not good. Now, when you're playing the Giants, that's the perfect remedy for this type of situation because the Giants' defense is not good. So I think it's a rebound week for Davante Adams. His importance to the offense has not gone away. And listen, very well while you're watching this, he may be on a different team. I am filming this on Monday night, and the trade deadline is Tuesday. So he may be on a different team. From what I've seen, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I'm going to have Davante Adams here at 7 with the understanding that he's a Raider this week. But either way, I'm having Davante Adams still inside the top 10. Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins taking on the Chiefs in that matchup. Listen, I want every piece of this matchup. Every piece of it. There's 2 matchups this week I want every piece in. The Kansas City-Miami game and the Buffalo-Cincinnati game. I want every piece of it. Jalen Waddle finally popped off in week 8, and it's coming back. It is coming back full swing because Jalen Waddle is important to this offense, and he never wasn't important. He just was having a tough string of games there. The importance has always been there, and he's starting to find his groove with Tua Tagovailoa. And in this matchup against the Chiefs, I think points are going to be all over the place, and I want every piece of this matchup, and Jalen Waddle absolutely inside my top 10 this week. Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers this week versus the Indianapolis Colts. Listen, Adam Thielen had a relatively down game last week as well in week 8. It was kind of similar to the Keenan Allen situation where when you look at the numbers last week, Adam Thielen was still just as important in this offense as he's been all year. He's still clearly the wide receiver 1, and he's still the best wide receiver in the room. But he just didn't find the end zone last week. That's the difference here. Adam Thielen still, with that kind of target share, is going to be in this top 10. Because when you look at the target share and then you look at the Indianapolis Colts, who their weakness is in the secondary, Adam Thielen's set up for success this week. I don't have an issue here because he still sees 10 targets per game. That's the ultimate reality here. You have someone inside the top 10 who's seeing at least 10 targets a game. That's just a volume rule of thumb because volume at the end of the day is king in fantasy football. Mike Evans at 10 may feel a little bit high for Tampa Bay's wide receiver this week. They're taking on the Houston Texans in Houston, who are coming off an embarrassing loss to the Carolina Panthers. So Houston, I think they're going to be motivated to win this game, and I think they probably will. But that doesn't change the fact that I still think Mike Evans is a very good fantasy receiver. So when you look at his numbers on the screen, he's basically averaging 14 fantasy points per game and almost 8 targets per game. So those are good numbers here. Now, the difference ultimately comes down to if Mike Evans finds the end zone week to week. Because the numbers that you're seeing as far as receptions go, that's not going to cut it really. The reception yards are good because he's a big play threat. And that's why he remains a top 10 guy, because the upside he has week to week is very large. It doesn't matter who he's playing unless it's Marshawn Lattimore of the New Orleans Saints. Mike Evans has high upside every single week. Baker Mayfield's strength as a quarterback. As bad as he's been playing over the past several weeks, he does still have a good deep ball, and Mike Evans can still hit on a deep ball. So Mike Evans, it's always going to be a game of Russian roulette a little bit, but Mike Evans, to me, with that type of target share and with the big playability, the upside that he has is just too high for me with some bye weeks and some injuries to some quarterbacks that we're about to go through for him not to be inside the top 10. And same applies to Nico Collins here at number 11. Nico Collins, to me, the target share has been dropping. That's a little bit concerning here. He's now averaging less than 7 targets per game. And the yards per game obviously went down after he did not record 50 yards receiving against the Carolina Panthers. Like, it was a concerning week for sure. I'm still sticking with Nico Collins. What we've seen from Nico Collins this year is a guy who's very efficient with the work he gets. He's averaging less than 5 receptions per game and still averaging over 80 yards per game. The guy is very efficient with his numbers right here. Still averaging 13.2 fantasy points per game. And listen, there's a big boomer bust element to Nico Collins. He's a boomer bust type of player. The good thing is Houston is taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in that matchup. Tampa Bay's weakness has been in their secondary of late. So I'm not calling it the matchup of the week. I'm not saying it's some tremendous matchup that you need to take advantage of. What I am saying, though, is that Nico Collins still is the wide receiver one in this offense. And any week, he could pop off for a big game, and you don't want him on your bench when he does. Number 12, T. Higgins in that matchup versus Buffalo. Again, I want every piece of this offense right now. Every single one of them, I want them in the lineup here. T. Higgins starting to find a groove again with Joe Burrow because Joe Burrow is back. So Jamar Chase is top 3 again. And T. Higgins is starting to crawl his way back up. Now, if T. Higgins was taking on a team like Pittsburgh or Baltimore, he would not be in the top 12. A game against Buffalo, though, where I think points will be everywhere, and as well as Cincinnati's offense has been running the last several weeks, he's got to be inside the top 12 for me because the upside is there. We know the upside is there. He just hasn't hit it yet consistently this year. He had a 2-touchdown game. He had a decent game last week. The guy's coming back, and I want every piece of this matchup. Simple as that. Number 13, Devonta Smith. I really want every piece of this matchup as well against the Cowboys. I really do. And he found the end zone again last week, had a good week. So Devonta Smith coming back, having a good week as well. Here's the reality with all of these wide receiver twos on good teams. Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, they're all so capable of having a good game because they're on great offenses with great quarterbacks. So you can't ever have them too far down the list. Like, none of them are ever going to be outside of the top 30. If they're all healthy, they're all going to be inside the top 30 anyways. This one's good because he's coming off a good week and he's got the matchup where I think there's going to be a lot of points. I'm playing Devonta Smith this week. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, 14 and 15. They're the big names to drop, obviously. This is a problem. They've got quarterback issues. Now, here's the thing. When I was first making these rankings, I was originally not going to put them that low. The reason why is because Matt Stafford's a tough SOB. This guy has played through lots of way tougher injuries than this over the years. He's tough. He's well known. Like, part of his legacy is that he plays through these types of injuries. Well, I have a problem with this one particularly because I saw that the Rams are actually looking for a veteran quarterback help. And by the time you're watching this video, they may have already added a veteran quarterback. So that shows me that they see this as him missing at least 1 or 2 games. I am worried about that. And that's why they have dropped. But with that said, I still have faith in the offense that is run by Sean McVay. He's going to get the ball in his playmakers' hands. I get it. They're both coming off of bad games. Cooper Kupp's coming off his 2nd straight bad game. They're both too good. They're both too talented. He knows he needs to get the ball in their hands. That's the reality here. I can't rank them much lower than this week because the Los Angeles Rams are taking on the Green Bay Packers. It's a great matchup. There's a lot of things that line up here. He just needs to they both need to get a quarterback, and we will see how this one progresses throughout the week. Number 16, Michael Pittman Jr., man, taking on the Carolina Panthers in Carolina this week. I have grown so big on Michael Pittman Jr. this year, it's crazy. Like, I was never a big Michael Pittman Jr. guy. I never really was. I always thought he was overrated. I'll tell you what, he's been playing really well in this offense, run by Shane Steichen, who I have praised many times on this show. This guy knows how to run an offense, and he turned Jalen Hurts into what he is today, which is an excellent quarterback. Shane Steichen is bringing that offensive system over to Indianapolis, and even without Anthony Richardson, they're still putting up points. And Michael Pittman is a direct result of that. He's been great, and it's a contract year for him. With this Carolina Panthers matchup, I like it. I'm continuing to start Michael Pittman, and I advise my audience to do the same. Chris Olave at 17 is a concern for me at this point. Listen, Chris Olave still sees the target share. That's not the problem. He's seeing just under 10 targets per game. Why is he getting 10 fantasy points per game? Why is this happening? I've said it over the past several weeks, and it like he got arrested before week 8, and like it doesn't really matter that much. But the ultimate reality is that when you look at Chris Olave on film, this guy doesn't look like there's a couple different explanations for it. Either he doesn't really want to be out there, which I hope that's not the case. Or number 2, he's confused on what he's doing. There's been so many times he has looked so out of position, and you only see that when you watch the film. On that Thursday night game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, he missed a deep ball that Derek Carr threw. It was out of bounds. He wasn't going to catch it anyways, but he was so out of position. This past week, he had the opportunity to walk in a touchdown, and it bounced off his helmet. Something's happening with Chris Olave right now. It's a concern, but just because of the target share alone, that's why he's here at number 17. But again, all these guys that are above him, even Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, I would play over Chris Olave right now. Jacobi Meyers coming off the bad game at 18 here for the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm still playing him this week versus the Giants. Like I said, it's all matchup right here. You look at the game against the Lions, it was a bad game for Jimmy Garoppolo and a bad game for this passing offense as a whole. There's no getting around this one. That doesn't mean it translates to the next week. Against the Giants, I'll take my chances on this matchup right here because the Giants defense is not good. They're just not. They just gave up over 100 yards receiving to Garrett Wilson, who's a great player, obviously, but Jacobi Meyers has been really good except for week 8. That's the only game that he hasn't been good because it was the worst game from the Raiders as far as passing goes. They're going to be fine this week against the Giants. They'll rebound because the Giants, even maybe they may be better coached, and I do believe they are more well-coached team, but they're not as talented, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So I have this Raiders team, the Raiders wide receiver core, having a bounce back week as a whole. 19, Gabe Davis shoots up the list, and there's multiple reasons for it. This is one of the bolder takes this week, and I'm interested to see what y'all think about this one. Gabe Davis, when you look at the targets per game, like they're better than they have been in the past, like ever in his career. He's averaging almost 6 targets per game, and he had 12 targets in that Thursday night game versus the Buccaneers. Gabe Davis is finding consistent target share. And obviously, you know he's a big play threat. He's got 5 touchdowns this year. You know he can find the end zone, and you know you're either going to get a massive game from Gabe Davis or you're going to get nothing. I'll take my chances in this matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, man. I will take my chances. That's the simple reality. Taking your chances in this kind of matchup when he's getting some good games this year more consistently than usual, I'm taking my chances this week. Number 20, Garrett Wilson finds himself in the top 20 again in these rankings this week, and they're taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. Multiple reasons for this. Garrett Wilson's target share is absurd. He's averaging almost 10 targets per game in an offense that barely throws the ball. And he's actually been, the efficiency numbers are actually climbing. Like, he's getting almost 70 yards per game with Zach Wilson. That's because Garrett Wilson's a tremendous player. This is the ultimate what could have been season for Garrett Wilson because if he had Aaron Rodgers right now, he would be an easy top 10 pick for me every single week. No question about it. But obviously, since he's got Zach Wilson, we've got to leave plenty of margin for error because Zach Wilson is not good. So, but in this type of matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers, I'll take that matchup because the Chargers defense, their major weakness is through the air. They do not cover well through the air. Don't use last week against the Chicago Bears as a barometer for this one. They've got a better passing offense than the Bears, and that's saying a lot. Zach Wilson is better than Tyson Bagent, and Garrett Wilson is better than DJ Moore. I like Garrett Wilson this week a lot. Number 21, DeAndre Hopkins. Where did you go, my friend? One of my favorite receivers over the last decade, finally back inside of here, and I feel confident telling my audience about this one. They're taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and here's the thing. DeAndre Hopkins obviously had a hat trick this week. He had a hat trick in week 8, and he only had 4 or 5 receptions. Like, you're not going to see that kind of efficiency again from DeAndre Hopkins. The good thing about this is that I think Will Levis actually is a pretty good quarterback. In my Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide I put out over the summer, I said Will Levis is a boomer bust quarterback. He's either going to be really good because he's got a lot of good physical traits, or he's going to be awful. Well, that was a great start. That was a great start to his career. And they're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers on Thursday night, which from a preparation standpoint is not ideal. And DeAndre Hopkins is dealing with an injury right now. He's probably going to play, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are weakening up in the secondary. Their secondary has been the problem this year, and Levi Wallace and Patrick Peterson have both given up a combined over 600 yards receiving this year. And Minkah Fitzpatrick has already been ruled out of this game. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be able to take advantage of this matchup. While I do think that Pittsburgh's pass rush will be able to get after Will Levis in this game because of Tennessee's weak offensive line, I do think that DeAndre Hopkins, with what he did last week, what he could build off of with Will Levis, is going to be ultimately positive, and that's why he's at 21. And not much higher than this because I do think there will be some deficiencies from the passing game just because of the strong Steelers pass rush. Number 22, Zay Flowers this week, taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Listen, Zay Flowers to me every week is going to be on this list because of the target share. He's averaging almost 8 targets per game. But we have to accept reality here. Wide receivers in Baltimore they've always been like this. There's just not enough upside there because Lamar Jackson doesn't throw for that many yardage to his wide receivers. Last week is the perfect example. Zay Flowers had 5 catches and he didn't even have 20 yards receiving. That's because Lamar doesn't throw the ball down the field that much. That's going to limit Zay Flowers' upside week to week. Now, in this kind of matchup against Seattle, this is not an ideal matchup either. So Zay Flowers does have to be lower on the list as a result of that. But just because he's got a consistent target share, I still feel confident telling my audience that you can play him in certain circumstances. 23, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns this week. Listen, Amari Cooper, I've said it every single week. He's the hardest guy for me to project week to week. Every week is different with him. Every single week. He's taking on the Cardinals this week. On paper, great matchup. Great matchup. But you know what he's done in great matchups this year? He's given you nothing. And it's not entirely his fault. He's got a quarterback carousel he's dealing with right now. It's not all on Amari Cooper, but we can't get any consistency with him, which leaves me no choice but to put him as a bottom-end wide receiver too, while also saying that if you're looking for a big boom game, go for Amari Cooper if you've got no better options, because this guy does have ability to give you a 20-point game. That's the reality with Amari Cooper. Tyler Lockett at 24, taking on the Baltimore Ravens. Tough matchup here. And again, he's probably the second hardest wide receiver to rank out week to week. Tyler Lockett gives you anywhere from 20 fantasy points to 0. Tyler Lockett is capable of great things, but he's just not consistent enough with his target share. 7 targets per game does not tell the story for the season. He's had 3 targets in games before. Tyler Lockett's boomer bust. That's ultimately what we're dealing with here with Amari Cooper and Tyler Lockett. And in this matchup against Baltimore, I don't love this matchup at all. Number 25, Jordan Addison. Fallen from grace, not by his own doing. It's actually depressing. Jordan Addison, you can see on the screen, has been great. Dude has 13.6 fantasy points per game, and he's had 7 touchdowns so far this year. Why does he fall this far? If you have not seen, Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles and he's done. So their quarterback situation has become a massive mess. And it's, again, not by the faults of Jordan Addison. And really, when you look at the matchup, it's actually a fantastic matchup this week against the Atlanta Falcons. They just gave up a ton of points to DeAndre Hopkins. So the matchup is great. I'm just depressed to talk about this one because there's inevitably going to be a ceiling downgrade with a new quarterback here. It's just not going to be as great. Jordan Addison's still inside the top 30, but I had to rank him way lower than I have been. 26, Jackson Smith-Njigba still inside the top 30, rising up the rankings this week. This is something I am happy about. Taking on the Baltimore Ravens, again, not an ideal matchup, but every week he's getting more and more important to this offense, and he's scored 2 weeks in a row now. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I said it weeks ago, the missing piece here was the downfield targets, and once he gets them, he's going to be great, and he's getting them consistently now, which makes him a great fantasy option. Every week, he's going to continue to be very reliable because the reality is you can't count on Tyler Lockett week to week, and you can't count on DK Metcalf week to week. Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to become quickly a guy that Geno Smith can rely on. So even in a bad matchup, I still will start Jackson Smith-Njigba over someone like a Christian Watson. Josh Downs at 27. You got to put him in here. The dude has been balling. He's been balling. In Indianapolis this week, taking on the Carolina Panthers. Matchups there, and he's been really good. So, there's no question to me that Josh Downs is a very good player right now. He's averaging basically 10 fantasy points per game, and he's averaging 7 targets per game. The problem is, of course, if you're playing in a half PPR format, if he doesn't get a bunch of catches, he's probably not going to get that many yards. He's averaging almost 60 yards per game on 5 receptions per game. That's because he's not a big downfield threat. He doesn't have that kind of speed. He's a Hunter Renfrow underneath type of guy who's got great hands and runs great routes. That's what you're looking at here, but he's on a roll, and this offense uses him perfectly. So yes, he will be inside the top 30 this week in a favorable matchup versus Carolina. Marquise Brown at 28. He's got so many issues, and it's really not at his fault. It's kind of a Jordan Addison situation. Dude's been playing well. He's been very consistent. He's been their main option. He's been reliable. They're taking on the Cleveland Browns this week, which is already a tough enough matchup as it is. And he's also got another quarterback change, and it's not for Kyler Murray. It's for Clayton Tune. Buckle up. Marquise Brown's upside is just not that high this week. But he does have to remain in here because he's consistently their best option, as you can see by 8 targets per game, almost 9 targets per game. Chris Godwin at 29 here, taking on the Houston Texans. Chris Godwin, as I discussed in my Monday night live stream, what I got right, what I got wrong, I admitted faults in my Chris Godwin ranking before the season. Chris Godwin's been very consistent. He's getting like six catches for 50 yards basically every week. You can see the numbers on the screen. It's been very indicative of his entire season. Those are not skewed numbers. That's basically what he's doing week to week, which is fine. That's bottom end wide receiver 2, mid end wide receiver 3 numbers. Those are not bad numbers. We just have to acknowledge his upside is not that high week to week because he's just not a deep ball guy for Baker Mayfield. So you have to acknowledge the upside is capped, but the floor is actually pretty high. And rounding out the top 30, DJ Moore here, taking on the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, rough matchup here. Rough matchup, and if you saw the Sunday night game, you saw that Tyson Bagent is just not that good, and Tyson Bagent is getting the start again. So, DJ Moore's upside is capped with Tyson Bagent. He needs Justin Fields back. His upside with Tyson Bagent has not been very high. He still is in the top 30 because he's clearly the wide receiver 1 in this offense, and he's getting plenty of targets, and he's been still good with his work. But the upside is going to be capped to Tyson Bagent. That's just a fact. And in this matchup against New Orleans, I don't like it at all. As promised, my underdog wide receiver of the week, I'm very excited about this guy. I've really been trying to include him in my top 30 wide receiver rankings every week. I can't do it because his target share is not consistent enough. But the big playability with Rasheed Shahed has been excellent. Rasheed Shahed, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, taking on the Chicago Bears this week. The upside that he brings week to week as a big play threat has been so consistent this year, it doesn't make sense. He's averaging 3 targets to 4 targets per game, and he's still coming out with massive fantasy output because he's a very good player, and Derek Carr works really well with him. So I wanted to include him this week. The only reason I couldn't is because his target share is not consistent. But with this kind of matchup against Chicago and with the big playability that we've seen from him over the last several weeks, he's the perfect guy for the underdog wide receiver play of the week. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below and what questions you need answered for week 9 fantasy football. And if you want to see some buy low trade targets before week 9 fantasy football, click on this video right here.